All right, good evening, everyone. So, welcome to another episode of the Engineering Leaders podcast series, where we actually bring together engineering leaders from various fields to really pick their brains and their experiences on how a young, aspiring engineer can succeed and have an exciting career. So, today we have Joshua, who is an established tech leader in the data center operations industry. So, his vast experience actually includes 15 years in the public sector, working in reputable companies such as A Star and GovTech, holding top leadership positions and running high-performing engineering teams to, maintain a very integral support network for our society on a daily basis through centers operations. So, Joshua really, through his LinkedIn posts and, through his mission, I can really sense that he has a very strong conviction and passion for the industry, believing that his work alongside, the passionate engineers he's working with really allows him to serve the greater society by keeping the lights on, essentially, for citizens every single day. And he hopes that his content and outreach will inspire many young engineers to take up the helm to be part of his industry and a meaningful career as well. So without further ado, let's welcome Joshua here on the show. Really excited that you are here today.
Hi everyone, this is Joshua. Foremost, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be able to be a part of this. It's a privilege. I would say I'm here first and foremost as a friend, and as a friend and a sibling, as part of the broader tech community. I think there's so much that can be said, that needs to be said. But I would sum it up perhaps by saying that data centers power the way we live, the way we work, the way we play. So in our offsite banter, we spoke about what happens if data centers were down for a day. It's not just about not having Instagram or Meta or even Netflix, but think about a day where you're not able to draw money from the ATM machine. You're not able to get certain services from the government agencies because a lot of these services have been computerized. So if it's computerized, that means it's running on a computer somewhere in a particular data center. So when the data center is down, that means the internet is down. That means e-transactions are down. That means information is unavailable, and not just the way you play, but the way you live, the way you work, the way you spend money. None of this is possible. So imagine that day where all these services are unavailable to you. Basically, it's a disruption of the entire economy and society as well.
Well, that's such a very important, part of our society that needs to be highlighted. I believe actually, many people take data centers for granted and just live the way they live until one day something really do happen and our lives are fractured lah in some way or another. And Joshua, really glad that you are really taking the helm to lead the charge, okay, to really let people on the society know more about this industry. Okay, so just curious because you seem to have a lot of passion in terms of the data center operations. So I'm just curious as to what got you really interested in this field itself.
Okay, I think I lost you for a moment, but I will just imagine that you probably said, what got me started. So I'm just going to go from that point.
Yes,
And
and the data, like what made you actually go into the data operation? Like data center operations. Yeah.
so I think during my time, or even before my time, you don't hear of someone intentionally joining the industry. There was no such industry. Data centers used to be, at best, an extension of the telecoms. So telecom exchanges, they have server rooms that houses IT equipment, telecoms equipment. Slowly, we had what soon became commercial data centers. But I think most of the people who worked in the industry, were part of the industry, they tended to come from the IT or from the network or possibly from the telecom side, because the industry didn't quite exist. It's only in more recent years where you hear of someone who says, yes, I'm graduating and I want to join this industry. But then there wasn't such an industry. For myself, I spent a good part of my private sector life working in IT. And as I worked with IT, I had to deal with IT servers, which were in server rooms, data centers. And being naturally curious, I wanted to understand how it all comes together. And for it to come together, you need to understand it at the network layer. You need to understand it at the application layer, but you also need to understand it at the server layer and the server room that supports it all. So it comes with power, it comes with cooling, it comes with infrastructure. But understanding how it all comes together, it was never quite apparent. And one day I had an opportunity to make that transition. I literally begged the person who eventually became my boss, and I said, "Sir, I don't think I'm qualified for the role, not equipped for the role. Don't really quite know too much about it. But if you would have me, I'll be glad to take on the role, and I will make that I'll make that leap to try to um, be what the role needs me to be." And that's how I got started. It was a gamble, it was a leap of faith, but it was also me trying to make sense of what would my life be if I continued to be an IT administrator. And I was, I think, a decent Sun Solaris systems administrator, but they were easily, should I say, I think hundreds of thousands of such administrators around. Literally, there are millions of administrators in the world. But how many IT professionals, IT practitioners actually understand data centers, work in the data center, and has an opportunity to run a data center? I think that's a very, very rare opportunity. So I saw the opportunity, I took it. And on hindsight, it was a very good choice because I've learned things which most of my peers would never get to learn. And since then, it has been a journey and an adventure.
Wow, really, really inspiring to hear, your story of how you actually took that leap of faith, which, a lot of engineers tend to, be in their comfort zone and, they tend to actually go through the motion, but, that gamble actually paid off in spades, and, you look at where you are right now. So, continuing where you left, I mean, like, what you have mentioned, why should actually one seriously consider a career in the data center space? And what kind of fulfillment that you have received from pursuing this career that you love to share more to the audience about?
Well, I've in recent years I've gone for several interesting interviews. I've often been asked this question, and what I explain to them, not everyone gets to be an advocate. Not everyone gets to change the world. Not everyone gets to do that. Not everyone gets to be a scientist, a teacher, a doctor who changes the world. But what's the next best thing? What's the next best thing to being a person who changes the world is to give support to the people who do change the world. Now, the people who change the world, the governments, the policymakers, the doctors, the researchers, the business people, the economists, the list goes on. They do the hard work. But what we do is we want to empower them with the compute that they need to do their work, which means that we need to give them a compute environment that is safe, that is secure, that is reliable. Of course, in recent years, we often highlight it has to be sustainable as well. And when we can do that, they can then do their work. So in the same way, just as I've been in public sector for a good 15 years, but anyone who works in a data center is supporting, in effect, an entire community, supporting all these economic and non-economic activities to make sure that the beneficiaries ultimately, they can continue living the way they want to live, the way they live, the way they work, the way they play. All of this is supported by the computers. And the computers happen to be housed in buildings which we refer to as data centers. Someone has to do it. It more often than not, it happens behind the scenes. And my advice to a lot of friends is that when you see that, you will come to realize that that is where you can make impact. You don't need to be very, very talented. You don't need to be very, very smart. Of course, it's good if you are. But if you want to make impact, this is an opportunity where every day your impact is on the data center. And this data center is supporting millions upon millions of people. That's impact.
Wow, that's really that's really inspiring. Really can sense that conviction that you have, and that mission that you have with regards to running this data center. It's almost like it's really a necessity that you have to hold this structure, otherwise the whole society will fall. And very, very curiously, because you also mentioned that this has been a career that you actually jumped, I mean, like moved or transition from being a IT professional over here. And I believe throughout your 15 years you have seen how the internet has changed, and how the the global landscape has changed. So what are some of the challenges that we are actually facing right now in today's day and age, as compared to previously, especially when it comes to the data center operation side? Because I believe the internet has really changed the way we use it. Mm.
Suffice to say that, well, just for the past few years, we have lived through a crisis, a real crisis, a global crisis, a global pandemic. And and I think we don't want to waste that crisis. What have we learned from that crisis? It is that we cannot continue the way we have been continuing before the pandemic. It cannot be business as usual. When we come to terms that it cannot be business as usual, then it forces us to ask some very disturbing questions. What do I need to do that I'm not doing now? What do I need to do to get better at what I'm doing? And when you ask this question to the likes of Azure or AWS or Huawei or Tencent, and the list goes on, they are all obsessed about serving customers, but they're also obsessed about saving the planet. Now, what do I mean by saving the planet? We want to, on one hand, serve the people, but what's the best way to serve the people is to ensure that there is a future for the same people. And that's why, be it data centers or be it any other industry, we're all in the business of sustainability. And because data centers is an amalgamation of the needs of millions of people, it is a very opportune way to make that impact. When data centers become more sustainable, it means that more people can be served, but at the same time, we reduce the environmental footprint of serving these people. So, but of course, how to do it, the devil's in the details.
I see. So, but you mentioned about sustainability, and I believe running such data centers will consume a lot of power and electricity. So, just curious as to what are some of the general directions that sustainability within data center operations are heading to, and what's your involvement and your opinions on those developments?
Well, let's see it from an individual perspective, and let's see it from a corporate perspective. As an individual, you are led by conscience. So what makes sense to you might not make sense to another person. I know of a consultant, and he shared with me that he became vegan for some years because his conviction tells him that that's the best way to serve the planet and to fulfill his personal convictions. And I said, bro, that's fine. I'm not prepared to give up meat, but I am definitely very impressed by your convictions. So what makes sense to me might not necessarily make sense to the next person. So we are led by our own personal convictions. Now, having said so, when you bring this to the corporate obligations are a little different because there are legal obligations, there are industry practices that needs to be done, and there are certain expectations which are put upon them by the customers at large. And part of that is we need to be more sustainable because, well, for one, the regulations are coming. Like in Singapore, we talk about Green Mark, we talk about various regulations like SS564. All of this is already there. So we are trying to keep pace with the regulations. We're also trying to, I think, do what is right for our customers. To do so, it means we have to think of doing it in a better way. So, for example, a very simple way of saying this, we are concerned about Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. We're concerned about the environmental footprint. One simple way is when you move equipment from one place to another place, from one country to another country, you use crates, you use lots of plastics. Can you reduce the amount of plastics being used? You can. Now, how do we do that? Again, the devil's in the details. I don't want to bore you with the details, but suffice to say, it's about simply just changing a business model or even just changing some very minute things. There are several data centers exploring the use of different fuels. When you use a different fuel, the amount of contaminants you produce as part of that power generation, that changes. So again, the devil's in the details. How do you do it? I don't want to give you a long list, but you have to be very intentional. You have to be very collaborative. Maybe one very simple example, and I believe that's IBM. They used to move equipment in crates, and then they realized that part of the crates can be recycled or they could use different materials. So by doing so, that reduces the amount of recyclable materials that they have to use. And just by doing that, that made a huge difference. So I think individually, corporately, we can all do something. Now, how do we do it? We have to think about it. But we must first start with the point that it can be done, it must be done, it will be done. When you're convinced that you're not just a consumer, but you are contributing either to the problem or the solution. And if you are contributing to the problem, you are putting aside something that those who come after you will have to clean up. So what's the responsible thing to do? It is to start now. Start where you are with what you have and do what you can. And if you do that, that's a very good starting point.
Wow, thanks for sharing your insights. And I believe the future is bright for data centers operations. And it seems that the whole industry is at least there's more exposure to it, especially compared to the past, when data center operations just started. So I believe of the audience who also like to actually know you a little bit better. Okay, and your journey as a young engineer in the past and now to where you are. So, when you were a junior engineer, what were some of the important, actions, activities that has allowed you to actually progress and advance to the career that you are at right now?
This may put some people off, but when I started out, I had to take a lot of nonsense, insults in the face, some humiliation. It came with the job. It is what it is. And at some point I said, I have to get better at my game. I have to. But in those days, the internet wasn't what it is now. You couldn't just download ebooks. There weren't that many ebooks out there. The libraries were pretty sparse on some of the topics. Very, very sparse. So the only way you can learn is to experiment, which is what I did. I had my own Sun Solaris server. I experimented it. I trashed it. I rebuilt it. I reinstalled it. I played with the configurations. I figured out how to hack it. And that was a very painful process. But once you've gone through that pain, you move from remembering commands to understanding the rationale behind the commands. Okay, I'm moving away from, I guess, general engineering to what is maybe a bit more unique to systems engineering. When you kind of understand the rationale behind how certain things are being done, you can take a few more steps than what the books and what your colleagues are telling you. And I realized it, during my time, we had IRC. And I don't think there's IRC now. I don't think there is. But in my days, my first access to real experts, there were these semi-anonymous people on IRC, went in. Some of them were kind of in part of what might be considered the dark web. And when I entered a particular channel, to my surprise, some of them were actually people who were working for Sun Microsystems. So these were the hardcore geeks. But for some strange reason, they were very grumpy. Some of them were very vulgar. I'm not too sure why. Some of them were just very acerbic with their words. But when I hung on to them, took a lot of their verbal abuse. And then when I said, sir, I have tried this. I have read the documentation. It doesn't quite work. And I kind of hung on to them until some of them said, okay, you try this. Step 1, 2, 3, and then you see what happens. So I learned it through observation. I learned it through experimentation. I learned it by shamelessly hanging on to some of these, colloquially, I'll call them sifu. And some of them really are sifu. I once worked on a particular system. I had more than 10 developers fly into the country, looked at the problem, they couldn't solve the problem. Finally, we found someone who was a guru, flew the person in, he came in front of the server, he typed in something, solved the problem, and to this day, we have no idea how he solved the problem. No idea whatsoever. We were all it was a circle, we surrounded him, we looked at him, and we were clueless how it was done. Now, mind you, this was before Sun Microsystems, they came up with the D language, before they came up with D trace, before they came up with all these diagnostic commands. It all came as a later generation. So when you're able to come to that point of mastery, things are very different. And I guess the challenge now is because there's so many distractions, how do you spend a lifetime to understand something to the point that you do become a master? You cannot be distracted. You have to be very intentional. You have to be very strategic at what you learn to the point that you are really good at certain things. So that is, I think, a very personal journey.
Well, thanks so much for sharing, your journey, and it must have been a really tough, journey at the start, having to deal with so many verbal abuse. I believe, not many people would have taken it positively, but it seems that you really took it in your stride, and you always aim to actually improve and master your craft. And just curious, because you mentioned a whole array of so many challenges that you have faced, but was there a particular big event or challenge that you faced in your career that you found it particularly eye-opening and actually left a very deep impact, or in the way you work and your life perspective?
Well, now that you mention it, yes. And this was while I was in private sector, we moved from country to country. There was a particular project in a particular country in Asia. We did the best that we could, but it failed. The project was a shipwreck. We fired everybody. Everybody. We had a team we hired for that geography, and we fired everyone. Now, I was the only person who did not get fired. I guess because I did the firing. So I didn't get fired. But that taught me a very deep lesson. And we don't often see it in IT, or at the least by the time it hits us as a young engineer, that's sometimes you learn that lesson too late, which is what you do as a person at work. It could shipwreck your own life, personally and professionally, but at the same time, it could shipwreck the lives of your colleagues and other people. So in a way, it is life and death. Of course, when I bring this to the data center, and in a data center where it's a high voltage environment, there are other risks as well. It's not just the risk of losing your job. It's about electrocution. It's about electrical explosions. It's about fires. It's about people who could lose their lives. And the same context applies if you work in many other industrial environments. In a mining environment, you could lose your life. In a submarine, you could lose your life. In many industrialized work environments, it is life or death. If you do not take it seriously, if you're not perpetually vigilant, you could do something that could lead to an incident where that's the last day of your life, or the last day of the life of your colleague. So I have encountered the very bad situation where I had to fire people, where people lost their jobs, and that impacted many other people. I have seen incidents where people could have easily lost their lives, human lives, not just jobs. And once you see that, it changes your perspective. So when I go to work, I always reminded that it is life or death. It is not masak, it is not play. Because when I mess up, I'm not just gambling with my own life, I might be gambling the lives of other people. And that's why I have to take what I do very seriously.
Oh, that's really profound. And so some a lot of people tend to, take their job for granted. Sometimes they, in their own, carelessness might impact, or at least negatively impact someone's lives, potentially endangering them. And thanks for the reminder that we have to be very conscious about and deliberate in our actions in our daily lives, especially in our work. And Joshua, just curious, because you mentioned, through the firing experience, probably you might have met, people, okay, that might have shown, very negative traits, okay, or perhaps maybe you have mentored young engineers that might not have that, that good traits. So because usually, I usually ask, what makes a good employee, what makes a good hire. But I'm just curious to find out, across the, career that you have been in, are there any traits of bad hires, okay, that actually sabotage their promotion or career advancement opportunities by displaying certain negative traits? What those traits, what do those traits are?
Well, that's such a deep rabbit hole. Where do we start? Exactly, where do we start? But I will start with, let me maybe do a preamble. You can be good at your job, but you can be bad at getting promoted. You can be good at getting promoted, but suck at your job. Now, let that sink in. Because working your career is one life skill. Doing your job is quite a different life skill. And sometimes you expect the two to be the same. They're not exactly the same. That is why you see incompetent people rise to power, and you sometimes see competent people not quite get rewarded. It's fine. It is what it is. Sometimes we do what we need to do out of professional ethic. We think it's the right thing to do. We hold the fort because it's the right thing to do. Even if we do not get promoted, even if we do not get rewarded, we do it out of conviction. When you do things out of conviction, that means it's about the journey, it's not about the outcome. Now, but to answer your question, I think there are quite a few. And if you talk about just being good at your career, not so much your job, I think one thing is you need to practice professional skepticism. And I'll put it in layman terms. That means you cannot be too naive. So, for example, if you are very trusting, and I'm a very trusting person, but I've had some bosses who remind me that you should question because it's your job to question. Imagine when an auditor goes to a bank or goes to a data center or goes to a FSI, and then the auditor asks, "Have you done this?" And the auditee says, "I have done it, but I just can't prove it to you. I kind of forgot to write it down, but just take it by faith. I have done it." Auditors will not accept that shit. They will not accept it. They would say, if you have done it, you can prove it. Because they practice skepticism, professional skepticism. That means they don't quite trust you, they want to verify. Or they trust you, but they still want you to verify. Now, if you can practice that, what that means is when you are facing an external party, like if you read Scott Berkun's book about project management, and he often says something about how sure are you that the other person is telling the truth? Now, that's another rabbit hole, which we won't go down. But when you exercise that, that means that when vendors tell you something, you want to understand what's the basis for the claim. When bosses say it can be done, you would want to understand the thinking process that led to them saying, yes, in 6 weeks' time, we will come to this point. When you start to have an appreciation of the thinking process, when you start to be able to ask the right questions, even if you don't quite get there, you kind of know where something is, like what my son would say, is very sus. It's very sus. So for example, when someone says, yeah, of course it can be done for a quarter of the price. And then you ask a very simple question. What makes you think so? What's the basis of that? Because when you can ask that question, you force the other person to be on his or her toes. That is a life skill. That's a life skill that will save projects. And sometimes when you can save projects, it can also save careers as well. So in a roundabout way, the ability to trust but also verify. to be skeptical enough to ask, how sure are we that we are not making the wrong assumptions? Sometimes it's about even questioning the motive behind it. So I have a mentor of sorts, a Sifu, and he always asks this: when someone says something to you, at the back of your head, even if you don't admit to it, always question what's in it for that person to tell you this. How does he or she gain from convincing you that this is the way to go? So I always have this at the back of my head, that nagging feeling. How sure is he? How sure is her? How right is this? Having that, of course, I will concede that's not very good for work-life balance. But that's the kind of skepticism that will save projects, that will save companies, and sometimes that's the same aptitude that will save careers as well.
Oh, thanks for sharing. And this is the first time I heard such a concept. And but you also mentioned a very interesting point. You can be great at your work, and you can be great at like what you do, and also like how you get promoted is might be two different things. And because I believe a lot of the younger career-driven engineers would love to be, they would like to do a good job, but at the same time they would also want to also promote and get rewarded. So besides what you've mentioned, to exercise professional skepticism, how are they able to actually marry both of them and achieve both of them together?
That's another deep rabbit hole, and such a deep one. But maybe I will kind of put it this way: there is form, there is substance, and you need a bit of both. It's like going to a restaurant and you look at the food, it looks like crap, and because it looks like crap, you don't want to give it a chance. But when you try it, it's so delicious. Now imagine that's your career. You've done such a great job cooking that meal, but you failed at the presentation. It looks like crap. You have the best ingredients, but it looks like crap. And you failed to set the expectation with the person eating the food. And without them even trying it, they say, no, I'm not putting this in my mouth. That's a chef that has failed at his career. He may have cooked something delicious, but he didn't take the next logical step, which is to manage the people who is going to consume the things that they churn out. So in the same manner, form and substance needs to work together. You need to be good at your work. That's the substance. But you need to be good at updating. You need to be good at managing the people. You need to be good at communicating. You need to be good at doing certain things that improves your BETNA. And by BETNA, basically it means that it improves your bargaining power when it comes to a negotiation. Interestingly, these are stuff that I learned at work. So for example, when you have a project meeting and 6 weeks down the road, you tell them that I know that you are going to deliver on time. I'm sending you a reminder. You say this 6 weeks ahead of time. 4 weeks ahead of time, you say this again. 4 days ahead of time, you say this again. And on the last day, when you tell the fella, I've given you 20 updates, I've given you 20 reminders, and 20 times you promised me that you would deliver. Are you delivering? Now, someone who does this is not doing so just to nag. Is doing so to improve his or her negotiation power when it comes to a bad situation. It becomes increasingly difficult for the other person to acknowledge that, oh, I screwed up. Then if you screwed up, shouldn't you have told me 2 weeks down the road rather than 2 hours before the deadline? Shouldn't you have been able to maneuver? Wouldn't I have given you ample opportunity for risk mitigation? So that is being very intentional. That's project management. You can be a good engineer, but a poor project manager. You can be a good worker, but you're a crappy employee because you failed to give the bosses and the colleagues the right updates, the right expectations, the right communication. So let me give you another example. And this is just I would say it's a curveball. So I know of someone who's very, very smart. who's so very, very smart, one of the smartest persons I know. But when this person engages his boss, he talks down to the boss because he has two PhDs and his boss doesn't have a PhD. So in his mind, he has moral high ground. And he thinks, why am I serving this fella who doesn't understand half the things I say? But by doing so, even though he has done a good job, he has just shipwrecked his own career, because who decides if you get promoted? Who acknowledges your hard work? Your boss. So when you screw with your boss, you're screwing with yourself. So just doing something that is emotionally satisfying or intellectually satisfying, but it might not do you any good in the long run if you are genuinely interested in having a career. So you see, there's a very subtle difference between doing your job and doing what it takes to be acknowledged, doing what it takes to do well in an organization. So that's a very subtle difference.
Wow, so thanks so much for the reminder. And I believe actually a lot of people needs to be reminded that just by being very good at what you do, but lacking that communication, does not help. I actually heard from somewhere that you don't just want to be a wallpaper. You just don't want to be faded in the background, okay, and you want to also let your presence be known, or let your work be shown as well. Which sometimes people, when they are actually they're working really hard, but sometimes it's just that the efforts, or they're not shown enough. And I believe your reminder actually tells us that we have to be very intentional with our communication too. Yeah. So, and I believe, because currently right now, we are actually, heading to a potential recession. I'm sure that a lot of engineers are uncertain about their job security, especially with massive layoffs from tech companies. But, as an engineering leader yourself, do you have any advice for young engineers during this period, not only to survive, okay, but to thrive and even promote, during this tough period?
I think engineers, at least a lot of engineers that I encounter who are so good at their jobs, they tend to be very bad at protecting themselves. I'm not sure why. I'm really not sure why, but I, if I had to give advice, and I don't think I'm qualified to, but if I had to, I would suggest that first, survive. You can't be all things to all people at all times. You have to know what's your priority. And during a bad season, the only thing that matters is to survive. Because if you survive, you can do something about it tomorrow. But if you can't survive today, all your future plans doesn't matter. So first, survive. And if it means doing what you don't like, in a bad season, my suggestion is suck it up. That's my personal advice. Now, it may not apply for everybody, but what I'm alluding to is sometimes to survive, you do things that you don't quite enjoy. It is what it is. But at the same time, while you're surviving, once you do survive, what's the next step other than surviving? It is to improve the odds that you survive tomorrow as well. So you want to ensure you survive today, and then you improve the chances that you survive tomorrow. So you lay aside some time, some effort to lay a pathway for tomorrow's success. Maybe today you didn't quite hit the notes, but you can do something to improve the odds of a better tomorrow, which is why you study, which is why you build up alliances, both within your company and outside your company and industry-wide, which is why you learn multiple skills. And sometimes, if you have to, you reinvent yourself. So, for example, I've managed network teams, I've managed projects, I've managed data centers, I've done advocacy work, I've done lots of very strange things that I didn't think I would get into. But each time when the winds blew in a different direction, I transformed because I want to be an Autobot. When it's time to transform, you transform, because by transforming, by doing something else, by putting aside what used to be important and picking up new skills, new interests, you improve the odds that you survive tomorrow. And of course, I know that there's a certain amount of gamble where you think, should I learn Kubernetes? Should I learn Python? Should I do something? Maybe you should, but at the least, you have to focus on your immediate needs while you put aside some of your effort to improve the tomorrow you. And whether that means going for the meetup groups, and I've done all of that. I think it makes a difference. Whether it means creating an online brand, which done that, seen that, I wouldn't say it's a waste of time. In fact, I would say that, at least for myself, it has given me a lot of unexpected opportunities. But you have to balance form and substance. You can have brand, you can have presence, you can have social media strategy, and that is form. And that form gives you certain competitive advantages. But once that form opens the door for the interview, when the interviewer talks to you, or when the bosses talk to you, when partners talk to you, and they put aside that perception of you, and they ask that question, do you know your stuff? Do you understand this? So you have to improve on both your form and your substance. If you have to read, you have to read. If you have to meet up with different ones to get fresh perspectives, that's what you do. So that's why for a good season, and for example, we have a data center careers Telegram group, we have a data center careers Facebook group, but we also organize regular meetups for a good season, because we wanted those among us who were maybe less socially active, especially during the pandemic, during the time where people were supposed to stay at homes. We wanted them to feel that they were still part of the same tribe. And because we got them connected, when we knew that some of them needed a bit of help, we were able to ask around and say, hey, this fella needs some help. Could we help with maybe user references? Maybe we could ask around and connect them to the right headhunters or recruiters. So all of this can be done. So when you start to help others and you get involved in the community, you're immersed in the scene. For one thing, you feel better about it. But more importantly, as you make impact, you also feel very differently about your own circumstances as well.
And actually that rings true with the spirit of how you are actually building your LinkedIn brand and really advocating for the career and as well as the industry. So I mean, I'm just curious as to what was because you actually mentioned a little bit about social brand and the idea of actually form. So for yourself, what actually inspired you to really get into LinkedIn and start posting content to really spread the message? Is it just because, is it really purely to spread the word of data center operations, or is there a bigger message that you want to give out to the world?
I think when I was 10 years younger, I was partly driven by pride. I'll be very honest. I looking back, I was naive, I was proud, and I guess when I had my first 5,000 followers, it felt very good. It felt very good for a few minutes. I just reached 28,000, and I don't feel anything at all whatsoever. It's not so much that I'm numb to it, but rather that I've taken a different perspective that what's the point of influence? What's the point of having thousands of followers if you're not doing something positive about it? So if there's anyone who does follow me, and at my age, I hope the only positive impact I can make is to encourage others to try. Because I learned a long time ago from my mentors and bosses that whatever it is, you do not give up easily. You must not give up easily. You can even suck at it. You can try and fail, but you must not give up easily. You try, you fail, you try, you fail, you get better at trying, and then one day you don't fail. I know I'm oversimplifying here. But I kind of started partly because I wanted to demonstrate to some of the people I cared for, including my own staff, that you can get promoted, you can become more relevant both to the organization and to the community and to industry-wide. You can get more traction with some of the recruiters if you are more intentional about your brand. And part of that means you have to be a little shameless about it. Because I've done it, and then I tell my staff, it can be done. Because sometimes they will tell me it can't be done because no one has done it before. No, I'll show it to you without any talent, because I'm someone with very few talents. I don't think I'm talented. But by taking some very practical steps, I've improved the chances of me getting access. I've improved the chances of me getting into some very interesting opportunities. None of it is talent. It's pure effort. It's about putting yourself out there, trying, getting better. And it's true for technical work. It's also true for non-technical work. It's also true for branding yourself, because at the end of the day, it is your job. It is your job to sell yourself. It is your job to market yourself, because you are your own CEO. You are your own CFO. You are your own CMO. You are your chief marketing officer. And if you don't market yourself, no one else is going to. And when you see it that way, it is your job. It is your full-time job to market yourself. And marketing yourself doesn't just happen at the day-to-day interaction within the company, but also about your non-physical brand. And to do so, you have to be very intentional about getting into certain opportunities. I started out with conferences. I volunteered at a particular conference, and I said, bro, there's nothing much I can help with, but what I can, I will. Because you're based in London, I'm based in Singapore. When you organize your trade fair, I will make the calls for you. And he was delighted. He said, okay, sure, what's the harm? But because I availed myself, I put in the effort. Slowly, when there were opportunities for speaking slots, he said, well, bro, why don't you take a slot and just be a filler? And I moved from being a filler slot to becoming a moderator. And now I practically speak at all the conferences, or at least conferences specific to my industry. And that happened because I made a conscious decision to do something that was very embarrassing, that was very inconvenient, that took me away from other things. But I said, I have to put aside some seed. That's what farmers do. If you have a bucket of seeds and you eat all of it, you don't starve today, but you will starve tomorrow. You have eaten up all your seed. But imagine if you have a bucket of seeds and you eat some because you have to survive today, but you also leave some and plant it and nurture the seeds so that you have a harvest in time to come. So that's being intentional. That's knowing that you have to be concerned about surviving today, but you cannot only worry about today. You have to do something about making sure you survive tomorrow and the day after tomorrow as well. So being intentional about it, even if you're not necessarily talented, not necessarily connected, don't have a lot of resources, but you can improve your chances if you think about it and have a game plan, and that game plan brings you closer to it. So in a bad season, you have to survive. So focus on surviving. But after you know that you're surviving, think about how you can improve survival for tomorrow as well. And if it means you put aside certain things to invest in, because whatever you learn today is going to be obsolete tomorrow. So what you learn, who you know, how you do it, and the way you think, all of this is part of your game plan. So it's a long story, but I remember a particular story. I'm not too sure if it's true. I think it is. And I read it from a book called Ambition. And in this book called Ambition, I actually bought a copy, gave it to all my staff. So that was my investment in my staff. And I said, and I recounted this story to some of them. In this particular book, they shared about this person who was a very lousy photographer. But he really wanted to work for National Geographic. And again, it's a story. I don't know if it's true. So he sold everything he had, quit his job, spent a year in the Amazon jungle. to take photos, pictures, because he loved natural photography, even though he probably was not too talented. But because he did this for a year, he gathered a following. And so National Geographic, after a year, offered him a job. Now, is it a true story? I can't quite tell. Is there a moral to this story? Sometimes I kind of question it, but I do think there is something to be said about being brave. Because you may be talented, you may be not, but if you're not brave enough to take certain calculated risks to improve yourself, to put yourself out there, to talk about how you can get better, then why would you be different tomorrow versus today? And if you're going to be the same every day, while the circumstances are changing, we talk a lot about VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. While the world is going downhill, are you going downhill with the world, or are you doing something to improve your own odds? So that's something to ponder over.
Okay. Wow, I really, really learned a lot from you, Joshua. And some of the deep lessons and some of the perspectives that actually many young engineers and even senior engineers should adopt to really, step out of their comfort zone and really see the world in a much more abundant and bigger way, and being able to unlock more opportunities for themselves. So, just to wrap things up, Joshua, my last question to you is, where can the audience actually best reach and connect with you for advice and opportunities?
Uh, there are so many. There is we have we have a Singapore data center Telegram group. We have a data center careers Telegram group. We have a data center careers Facebook group. We do meet on a regular basis. If you figure out where we meet, you'll get to see us on a regular basis. Beyond that, if you must, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. I say no to profiles who look very sus. I'm sorry, I'm learning from my children. You look at a LinkedIn profile that looks ridiculously impossible, I ignore these profiles. But if it's a genuine request, and I can't write referrals for the person, but if you wanted me to share a few minutes to share a perspective, I'll be glad to. So LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to reach me.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Joshua, for your time. And I believe the audience would really appreciate and your lessons that you have imparted and some of the hard lessons that you have learned along the way. And yeah, so Joshua, thanks so much for being on the show, and hope that Joshua has inspired all of you. All right. Okay.